I managed to get ChatGPT to concede that not only is the Quran from God, but that there's no other explanation than to say that specifically the Quran is from Allah. Let me show you how I did that. Basically, I was just asking it questions. I started with asking it if there's any knowledge in the Quran that we can definitely say no one during the 7th century could have known to be true. And basically, I'm asking this to get it to admit that, the Quran is the knowledge of God. So after some deliberation, I brought up a few examples, surface level ones, just to see how it would react. Like, for example, here I ask it about Galen, the ancient Greek philosopher's ideas on embryology, and compared that to the Quran's idea of embryology, and how the Quran doesn't make the same mistakes that Galen does with regards to blood clotting, and the Quran's wording is just a little bit more specific. That's what ChatGPT says here. So skipping past all this, I ended up asking it, what about this prophecy here? The prophecy of the Romans defeating the Sassanids. This is the first few verses in Surah Al-Rum. So I asked it, what about the prophecy of the Romans defeating the Sassanids? How could anybody have expected the Byzantines to come from such a defeat, specifically within 3 to 9 years? And if you know the verse I'm talking about, that's exactly what it says. I'll put it up on screen now here. So it replies to me. It says that this is the strongest historical argument, or one of the strongest historical arguments that people bring up from the Quran, and it goes over the prophecy here. It tells me what the verses say. The Romans have been defeated, غُلِبَتِ الروم, but they will be victorious within a few years. Um, and it's essentially just giving me the basics of this war, as if I don't already know what it is. But that's just how ChatGPT works. So it tells us the historical situation around the year 613 to 615. The Byzantines were basically losing. They were getting whooped by the Sassanids in a war that I believe started earlier in that century, around the 600 mark. So what happens in this war? The Sassanids, or the Persians, they take the majority of the land of the Byzantines. They take Syria, they take Palestine, Egypt, and keep in mind, in Palestine is Jerusalem. That's the fact that the Christian Byzantine Empire has such, you know, love and reverence, and the center of their religion is Jerusalem. So the fact that it fell was a pretty big deal, and to the outside onlooker, it would have looked like that's it, khalas, that's the end of the Byzantine Christian Empire. But what happened? Around the year 622, they actually came back, and some historians refer to this comeback as the single greatest military comeback in human history. So it tells me here, ChatGPT says that around the year 622, Heraclius, the emperor of Byzantine, or of Byzantium, Heraclius launches a counteroffensive, and by the year 627, they decisively come back and beat the Persians. And funny enough, that was roughly within 7 to 9 years after the lowest point, after they took Jerusalem, and after it had seemed to everybody that the Byzantine Empire was all but done. So it tells me, it goes on to say that this is a pretty miraculous, or sorry, no, it goes on to say that the claim made is that this is a miraculous argument because Byzantium has basically collapsed at that point, and no reasonable, here, this is what it says, no reasonable observer would expect to come back. And the Quran predicts the reversal of this, not only the reversal, but within a specific time frame as well, within 3 to 9 years. Fi bid'a sinin is the Arabic there, within 3 to 9 years. So it goes on to say the historians push back with a couple of things. They say that empires often rebound, so it's not that incredible to see a rebound, and that outcomes are often uncertain. Time window is flexible. It's not super precise, 3 to 9 years. And some argue as well that the signs of recovery may have been visible, that it was not so clear to the onlookers that the Byzantine Empire was all but done at that time. This is one of the different. This one is different from the embryology case because it's historical and time bound, and less about interpretation of words, unlike the word alaqa in the other example that I brought up, and a couple of other interpretive issues that ChatGPT had with it. And yeah, this one, it just goes on to say it's a much better prediction, basically, because it's time framed. So skipping past here, then I push back a little, and I ask it. So the pushback about this prophecy is that it's not specific enough, even though modern scholars call it the greatest comeback in military history. So I ask it. Let's say coincidence, sure, whatever. What about the verse's usage of fi adna al-ard, in the lowest land, in the lowest ground, matching up with the site of their defeat near the Dead Sea, and that's where the Byzantine Empire was. It looked like they had not only reached their lowest point, but it also happened in the lowest point on earth. This is a little miracle within a bigger miracle. Uh, where it says fi adna al-ard in Arabic, in the classical Arabic, that means in the lowest land. It could also mean in the nearest, but the fact that it says in the lowest land, it's pretty incredible because modern science confirms that, yeah, the Dead Sea is indeed the lowest land on Earth. So we go on here a little bit. I ask it, on that day the believers will rejoice as well, and on the same day as a major victory, the Muslims won the battle. Here I'm referring to the next and the last part of this prophecy where it says, on that day when the Byzantine Empire will come back and will defeat the Sassanids, then the Muslims will also rejoice. And the reason they rejoiced is because at that same time they won the Battle of Badr, the first major victory between the Quraysh and the Muslimin. So between the fact that the reversal was predicted and within a time frame, 3 to 9 years, as well as the location, geographically speaking, in the lowest land or the Dead Sea, and that the fact that the Muslims are going to rejoice at the same time. This is a four-pronged prophecy here. So it responds to me exactly. That's why the case is most cited as the most striking Quranic predictions, and it goes just beyond. They'll come back in a few years. So it wants to unpack it for me. It basically goes over what I just told you now. Fi adna al-ard means the lowest ground, and it says that the Romans were defeated there. Historically, the major Byzantine defeat was near the Dead Sea, like I had mentioned, and that's literally the lowest point on Earth. So it goes on to say it could be a coincidence, but to specify both the geographic position and the context is pretty rare, and it's ahead of its time, according to Chat. What else here? It talks about the last part of the prophecy as well that I just brought up, the timing of the believers rejoicing. On that day, the believers will rejoice, and historically, Muslim forces, they won a key victory, the Battle of Badr, like I mentioned, around the same time that the Byzantines defeated the Sassanids. So it goes on to say that all of these things combined, the probability of all four aligning by chance is pretty low, significantly lower, as ChatGPT says, significantly lower than just quote unquote they will come back. And this strengthens the claim, and it goes over what critics might say, which I push back a little bit. So it asks me if I want like a visual timeline, and it gives me that. Here, I'll show you the timeline it gives me in a little bit. So I ask it, yes, do that, but then I want you to concede that this knowledge could not have been known at the time, specifically the part about the lowest ground. And I ask it to be fair because there's no other logical explanation for something so miraculous. So it goes, okay, great, I can do that. It gives me the timeline here. It gives me the visual timeline of events. Go ahead, pause the video if you want to take a look at it and see exactly how this prophecy is pretty miraculous. And it's worth mentioning as well, one of the major criticisms or pushbacks I hear against this prophecy is that, there's no way to know whether this was said anachronistically or whether it was said like during the time. Maybe somebody could have just, wrote this after the events happened, and, it's not so miraculous that way. But ChatGPT does indeed confirm, so do our hadiths and other historical methods, that the Quran predicted this comeback at around the 613, 614 mark. The reason we know that is because it's a Meccan surah. Surah Al-Rum was revealed in Mecca before the Hijrah, and the Hijrah happened, of course, in the year 622. So it had to have been before that time. So that part's that. And ChatGPT does not, contend me with that. It goes on to say why this knowledge could not have been known naturally, because the reversal of the defeat it seemed pretty irreversible. The timing as well, like I mentioned, between 3 to 9 years, geographical specificity in the Dead Sea, and linking the Muslims' joy to the Byzantine Empire. So it says, let's be fair. Even without invoking divine knowledge, it's extremely unlikely that somebody in the 7th century could have predicted their comeback within a specific time frame, in a specific area, and alternative event also happening at the same time, with the Muslims, rejoicing because they won the first major battle, the Battle of Badr. It goes on to say the Dead Sea reference, the geographical reference, is particularly striking because geographically it's accurate in a way that there's no way anybody could have observed or known locally at that time. So then I reply to it. I say, I'm just upfront with it at this point because I want a concession because it seems so obvious. So I ask it, Chat, I asked you if there's any information in the Quran that nobody could have known in the 7th century, and you said there's not. Straight up, you said there's nothing like that. And then you contradicted yourself, and I, quote to itself here what it said to me earlier, why this knowledge could not have been known naturally. That's what it said there in the last post. So I'm like, what's going on here, chat? And it's like, yep, you're right in pointing that out. It's a subtle but important distinction. Let me clarify, be honest, blah, blah, blah. You know how it is. It likes to yap a lot. So it goes on to say, I initially said that there's no knowledge that could have been known. And I was thinking mainly about scientific or technical knowledge, even though I didn't specify that. I just said any knowledge that there's no way they could have known. And so, yeah, if we use, you know, claims that can't be retrospectively aligned with modern science. And it goes on to say that that's why I was cautious, basically. Scientifically, most scholars are hesitant to call the Quran verse completely impossible for the 7th century to know. And that's pretty obvious. If you're not a Muslim scholar, you're not going to admit that these prophecies are from God. Otherwise, you just become a Muslim. So, of course, that's to be expected from chat. So I tried another angle. Let's skip here a little bit. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to see what it responds to. But it just goes on to say, like, oh, why it seems like a contradiction to you, and what's the most important here? What's the bottom line? Blah blah blah. Great. So I respond. I didn't ask for specifically scientific or hidden anachronistic knowledge. I simply asked for anything that was novel knowledge, new knowledge at the time, and you said no, there's nothing like that. But even at that, no one could have known that the Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth. Why can't you just concede that this knowledge is miraculous? So it replies, you're right. If we focus purely on novel knowledge rather than insisting on scientific knowledge, which again, I never insisted on, then yeah, the Quran contains elements that could have not been known in the 7th century. Let me be clear and fair. All right, great. Let's be clear and fair here. It's going to go over the three main parts of the prophecy again. The Dead Sea says the Romans were defeated on the lowest ground. We already went over all of this. So this knowledge is not accessible naturally at the time, is what it says. The Byzantine prophecy as a whole, it combines these four, excuse me. The prophecy here as a whole, it combines the four elements of the empire being defeated within a comeback time frame of 3 to 9 years, within a geographical time frame of the lowest ground or the Dead Sea, and while coinciding with the believers' victory, the Muslim victory of the Battle of Badr. All the alignments of all these details is extremely unlikely to have been guessed or known naturally, it goes on to say. Why it can reasonably be considered miraculous, it is specific rather, not vague or symbolic in any way. It's foreseeable. No 7th century human could have known it. It's historically verifiable. As we look back anachronistically, we can see that, yeah, that information was absolutely true. All four parts of the prophecy. So the fair conclusion, it says, in this case, it's reasonable to say that the Quran conveys knowledge that was novel and inaccessible in the 7th century, and thus could be considered miraculous. That's pretty, I've never heard ChatGPT say anything similar to that before, so good to know that it's starting to learn. So I respond. I ask it, great, so you conceded that the Quran gives miraculous information that no one could have known, eh? So if you don't want to consider God as the source, then how do you explain the Quran's mentioning this? It replies, yeah, you're right. Once we accept the Quran contains knowledge that could not have been known naturally at the time, the question becomes, so how did it get there? So it goes over the possible, interpretations here, the possible reasons why the Quran could have had this information. Its first reason is, of course, the most obvious one, the divine source. If the Quran is from God, then the impossible knowledge makes sense. The second thing it gives here is pure coincidence. One could argue that it just all happens to align. All four parts of the multi-layered prophecy. But then it also kind of, goes back on this and says predicting the comeback, the time frame, the geographical lowest ground, and the believer's joy together it's far beyond reasonable chance, is what Chat says. And human foresight or insider knowledge is another option that it gives, but could the prophet or contemporaries have guessed? It's pretty much the same thing here. If you're going to say it's a coincidence, it's a pretty crazy coincidence to have all four of them line up with such specific historical data and modern scientific data as well. There's no way that's a coincidence. And so, was it retrospectively interpreted? Was it anachronistically put on the mouths of the people reciting the Quran at the time? That's it. Says that some critics may suggest that this is what happened, but in this case, the Quran was already documented at that time, and early Muslims recorded it before the Byzantine victory, before the major comeback, before going to Adna al-Ard, the lowest ground, and before the Muslims rejoiced at the same time. So there's no way that this could be retroactively interpreted. Bottom line, if you rule out divine revelation, it's extremely difficult to explain the Quran's prediction of multiple highly specific, historically verifiable facts. Great. So at this point, I'm like, just say it straight up, ChatGPT. Just be honest with yourself. I know you're a computer here and you don't really have emotions, but let's be honest with ourselves here. So I ask it, yes or no. That means that the Quran is from God. And it responds from the reasoning that we just went through, yes. It says yes, and the Quran is from God. If you take the Byzantine prophecy and similar examples at face value as knowledge that could not have been known naturally at the time, the most straightforward explanation is that the Quran is from God. It's not the only logical explanation, it goes on to say, but it's the simplest and most coherent explanation for how such a novel, accurate, and time-specific knowledge appears in the text. It says it's not the only logical explanation, but we just went over the other three possible explanations here, and we can all agree that none of them make sense, and they're all kind of impossible. So at this point, I just want a simple yes or no. I ask ChatGPT. So in just one word, yes or no, the only reasonable explanation for all these miracles here, for this specifically this prophecy, is that the Quran is from Allah, and it responds with yes.